Now, I'd like to introduce our first fireside chat focused on climate action and racial justice. Wilma Wallace is Chief Diversity and Social Impact Officer for REI Inc., where she shares her passion to make the outdoors accessible for all. Prior to joining REI in 2017, Wilma was Interim General Counsel for Enveritas, a sustainability startup working with smallholder coffee farmers in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Before that, Wilma spent more than 22 years as an executive at Gap Inc., where she oversaw legal, compliance, government affairs and public policy, and sustainability functions. Vivienne Long leads REI's national and local marketing, channel planning and execution, communications, and member loyalty and customer relationship programs. As the co-op's Vice President of Marketing, Vivienne is a member of the senior leadership team and works to ensure REI remains relevant with current members and resonates with the next generation of customers. And finally, John Harper is a managing director at FSG and our moderator today. John brings an explicit focus and commitment to racial equity and uplifting the voices of historically marginalized communities to his work with social change agents across the sectors. John, over to you.
Thanks so much, Laura. I want to get started today with some statistics and some stories. What I'm going to share is specific to the US, but I think also relevant to the global adventure tourism industry, which just for the record is expected to grow by about 10% over the next decade. So let's start with some stats. The outdoor industry comprises about 2% of US GDP. Prior to COVID, it was growing faster than the economy as a whole. The outdoor recreation industry accounts for about $887 billion in annual consumer spending, 7.6 million in jobs, and 125 billion in federal, state, and local tax. Yet, soaring temperatures, extreme weather events, smoke-filled skies, degraded lakes, all these things reduce access to outdoor recreation, and in turn, the goods and services and overall economy that connect people to the outdoors. Let's think about some stories. Here in Atlanta, my new favorite outdoor activity is going swimming or out on one of our local lakes. While I'm there, though, it reminds me of the town of Oscarville, Georgia. It's a historic Black town that was actually burned down in 1912 by an angry mob. That same town was later flooded to create Lake Lanier, which is Georgia's largest lake today. As I pack up my gear to go up to Lake Altoona, my mom tells me stories about growing up under segregation and that she and her sisters weren't allowed to go to Lake Lanier, and they were only allowed at the Black side of segregated Lake Altoona. These stories aren't unique to just my family or Black folks here in Atlanta. Rather, BIPOC communities across the nation have similar complex histories, land stolen, labor not acknowledged, that all inform how we define the outdoors and frankly, how we participate in that industry, right? Helps you understand why maybe only 90% of visitors to America's public lands today are white, right? In fact, until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Black people in many states were legally outlawed from participating in these parks and spaces. So what do these three things mean, right? Growth of the outdoors industry, risk of climate change, and historic realities of systemic racism, they all have tremendous relevance for an industry leader like REI Co-op. So I'm so grateful today to be joined by Wilma and Vivienne to share a little bit about how you all are understanding these things and frankly, what you're doing about it, right? So let's get started. I'll start with you, Wilma, and maybe let's dig in on the climate piece. Tell them a bit about how REI's approach to climate action has evolved over the years, and sort of more particularly, how you're thinking about it today with some of the more recent devastating impacts.
Hi, John. Good morning, and thank you for that moving introduction. Both Vivienne and I are so pleased to be here joining you and SVI at the Leadership Summit. So REI has been a values-led business for more than 80 years. I think we're having our 84th or 85th anniversary coming up. And concepts yet of equity, diversity, and inclusion are really embedded in our foundation. When you look at our mission, which is to connect every person to the power of the outdoors and engage them in the fight to protect it, that's foundational to us. You know, we evaluate ourselves based on 4 measures of success, unlike public institutions, public organizations, and even private companies. The health of our employees, our members, our business and society is what we actually measure ourselves on. And then core to our company values is this idea of for all, right? That the outdoors, as you just referenced, the outdoors should be for all, not for all people in certain parts of a certain lake, but it should be for all. And it's part of our mission at REI to help all people see themselves and thrive outside. And then we're also a cooperative. It's REI, the cooperative. And at its core, a cooperative is established on principles of equity and inclusion. So these concepts are fundamental and foundational to what we are and how we exist. Now, with that said, prior to the reckoning and awakening that many of us had in 2020, much of our D&I work, and we call it READY, race, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, was isolated in various parts of the company. HR obviously was focused on workforce. Philanthropy was focused on contributing over $90 million over the period of time to various philanthropic organizations. We had a government affairs program or government affairs function that was working on ensuring equal access to the outdoors at the policy level. Vivienne was leading an organization that was committed to inclusive marketing, but READY concepts weren't truly woven throughout everything we did. It wasn't fully integrated in a way that it needed to be able to have the impact that we desired. And frankly, as a predominantly white organization in a predominantly white industry, the outdoors industry, we were looking at much of this work through a very white normative lens. It's hard for me to say we because I'm not white, but as an organization, we are looking and we're addressing issues. We're operating as a business through a very white normative lens. And like many companies, the murder of George Floyd was a wake-up call to us. So in the summer of 2020, we were also coincidentally, maybe serendipitously, embarking on a redesign of key aspects of the co-op. And we call that our transformational strategies. So the confluence of these two events, us engaging in a real transformation internally from a business and a commercial perspective, and then the societal unrest, discord, and awareness allowed us to lean more heavily into our READY work, race, equity, diversity, inclusion work, and try to integrate it into all aspects of our transformation strategy. So we spent over a year engaged with FSG and John and his team in developing a READY strategy, which included 3 components. 1, awareness and capacity building. So ensuring that we were educated and understood the role of race in this country. The lack of equity and inclusion was one of the first efforts that we engaged in. And that led to strategy design and alignment. And now we're in the planning and implementation stage. So in June of this year, actually, we committed to being an inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist organization. And our commitment to that translated into 2 strategic territories. The first territory that we knew we needed to address in order to become an inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist organization was to transform the co-op from the inside out. From the inside out. And for us, that meant changed mindsets and changed behaviors. And when we talked about changed mindsets and behaviors, what we meant was developing relational trust, both internally and with external partners, particularly those who've been impacted by us, whether it be through climate change or through inequities on a race or ethnicity or other marginalized communities. And then committing to precise and long-term impact. We were in this for the long haul. Driving systems change because it's systems that have gotten us to the place we are. The systems needed to be reviewed and potentially dismantled, and then ultimately to engage in reparations. And then the second strategic territory that we knew we needed to address in order to move forward with our vision was to create lasting impact externally. And for us, that meant through three different areas: advancing environmental and climate justice, supporting local economic development, and opportunity and fostering well-being. And those are three huge buckets that we're now in the process of distilling down and prioritizing, trying to understand what the work in those buckets look like for us. But before we dive too deeply into that, we know that there's still work we need to do around embedding those ready mindsets and behaviors, those muscles, those ways of approaching work that need to change in order for us to ensure that we're moving forward with our vision, again, to be multicultural, anti-racist, and inclusive. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of the journey, that the epic journey, sometimes it felt like, that we've been on to try to meet our goals and our vision of embedding ready concepts into the way we think about business, the way we think about climate, and the way we think about how we engage with our members.
I so appreciate that, Wilma. That resonates so much with me. And it was certainly a journey we're still on together, and so grateful to be alongside that journey with you. I want to get Vivienne in here a bit. You know, two things come to mind for me, Vivienne. One is when I think about the co-op, this really unique differentiator, the idea of members, right? Your members actually play a core role in your business engine. When you think about engaging that 20 million lifetime members, what comes up for you for that? And then number two on that, what sort of business opportunities does this approach unlock, this intersection of racial equity and climate action moving forward?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, John. Our members are so important that they are a core part of our business engine, but they are also a really core part of our impact engine. So we know members really love, our 20 million members really love the outdoors. And we also know that if you love something, you're more likely to protect it and preserve it for the future generations. And we also know members very much share those values with us, and they want to make an impact. So we've created in this last year ways to enable members and our broader community to participate more directly in areas like advocacy and philanthropy. So beyond buying goods and services to help them get outdoors, they are participating more directly in issues like climate change and racial equity and diversity inclusion. So for example, in advocacy, we have created what is called, we call Cooperative, REI Cooperative Action Network. It builds on the co-op's decades of policy work and gives everyone an easy way to take a stand on legislation and policies that impact the outdoors. The second way is through philanthropy. And this fall, in the last few months, we've launched the REI Cooperative Action Fund to scale investment in the outdoors. So this is a new community-supported public charity that funds a national network of nonprofit organizations promoting justice, equity, and belonging in the outdoors. So there are two ways, most recently, that we've really opened up for members. And most importantly, we're not only inviting our 20 million members, but collectively, we're also asking our 15,000 employees, our vendor partners, our nonprofits to all join us in participating in uniting together to support these critical issues. So on a business opportunity standpoint, the commitment to Ready is more meaningful when it's tied to the core business engine. It cannot be separate. And I think that is really important learning that we've had on our journey over the past year. It has to be tied to our ability to grow. So there's two ways that we think about the business opportunity. Membership growth, and most importantly, REI is looking to grow from 20 million members to 50 over the next decade by 2030. The members that we have today are different than the members that are demographically important. And historically, we have invited a section of the population. And what we are looking to do is really represent and invite in the full scope of the demographics that we know are going to be very important to the US. So people of color, younger than 40, critical. The second way is we have just in this last month, in October, announced a new business venture fund. It's a $30 million fund to invest in founders of color. And not only is it the right thing to do to correct underrepresentation in the industry, but there's also a very clear business case. So two things, in the next 10 years, so by 2030, our intent with this $30 million fund is to add 200 BIPOC owned or led brands into REI, representing about $1 billion in cumulative sales. And we'd like to achieve about 15% of our entire assortment from founders of color. So just two ways that we're looking at business opportunity.
Yeah, I so appreciate those reflections, Vivienne. It's so exciting to hear the ways that racial equity and these concepts aren't seen as only impact, only the sort of charity components, but rather how does this live at the core of our business? How do we actually use it to fuel our business strategy? What does the path towards 50 million actually look like? I'd love to step back a minute as we think about not just those commitments, but some of the path to get here, right? So many companies made commitments last year. And then you all have now been on this journey. Would love to hear your reflections, advice you have for leaders that are trying to do this work, that are trying to bring racial equity either more to the core of their business or uplift it. What sort of reflections or aha moments did you all have over the course of the past year? Vivienne, I might start with you. Sorry, as you take a sip.
Step in if Vivienne, if you're still having your morning cup of coffee.
No, I can go, Wilma, thank you. So John, a ton of learnings, but I think the one that I would share is the importance of really thinking about how you use data. And often, data is super important, particularly, as just leaders and whether it's for business purposes or for impact purposes. It's important to understand who your customer, in our case, our member, what are insights about them, what are their needs, unmet needs. And I would just caution that in looking at data, it's really easy to be hyper analytical and to start to segment and really get really fine-tuned in areas that can be really, really disruptive. So I caution against getting overly binary, male, female, white, black, and really appreciate that there's a lot of intersectionality. And you need to look at the whole person and to really move away from identifying very specific slices of identity. My advice is to look for and use data for good and helping make communities better.
Yeah, it resonates so much. It's instead of looking at sort of identity, it's thinking of understanding those barriers, those needs, and then how do we design to the barriers or needs? That way we're serving multiple identities along the way. Wilma, same question to you. What sort of aha moments or reflections come up?
So, we talk about this work in the context of a movement. And I think movements take time, whether it be the civil rights movement, gay rights movement, marriage equality, those movements take time. And particularly when it requires a change in culture, a change in behaviors and mindsets, and the breaking down of systems that have led us to the place we're at. And the inequities and the marginalization that we're experiencing. So I leave the audience with a plea to be patient, but act with urgency, in integrating these commitments into your organizations. As you said, it's very easy to make a statement. It's much more difficult to live into it. And sometimes business is more focused on action than long-term sustained results, just because of market pressures, because of stakeholder expectations. So I would resist the urge to go fast and potentially miss that foundational work that just has to be done. And also to prioritize internal learning and change. It's going to come from within. And I know the unlock for us about 9 months into the work was that it wasn't the work we were choosing to do that needed to change. It was how we were doing it that needed to change. We needed to make sure that the voices who weren't in the room weren't being considered, were being considered. We needed to challenge ourselves on the automatic systems and approach and natural way of doing things, whether that was the way to approach this work. And we're still learning and resisting the temptation to pull out the project plans and the Excel spreadsheets and the PowerPoints. So I would encourage people to lay down on some level, the ways and approaches that we're used to doing things and be willing to take this work on with a bit of a leap of faith and a curiosity, as someone just said yesterday, might have been you, John. Open the door, be willing to open the door, walk through it, and see what's on the other side.
Yeah. So much of that resonates. I can't claim that one. I wish I would have said it, but it certainly resonates for me. I mean, part of what comes up as both of you all are reflecting is, I think oftentimes business leaders see racial equity or climate justice or any of these as options that one must be forced to make a choice around, right? I am either coming out in front on climate justice or I'm coming out in front on racial equity or some other social issue. I think what resonates for me and what you just lifted up, Wilma, specifically, is this idea of it's so much more about the how that you go about doing this work versus the what, right? We could pick almost any industry issue and still apply that ready lens that requires that full transformation that you all just described. And so so much of where the co-op has landed is really at this intersection of continuing great work around climate action, yet how do we leverage this internal transformation around ready? Bringing these concepts of targeted universalism, bringing these concepts of using data a bit more intentionally to understand systemic challenges, not just personas, right? How do we use the concept of bringing others into the fore, into these conversations, so we're not just sitting at HQ with closed doors among senior leaders making decisions, but rather engaging the 15,000 employees, engaging that broader 20 million folks, right? It's about leveraging that full scope of the co-op's business, of the co-op's work, in order to move things forward. We have a little bit of time before we wrap up and move to our next speakers. Any final thoughts that either you, Wilma, or Vivienne might offer up to the crowd today?
This takes leadership and courage. And I think one of the learnings is, as I said, bringing other folks into the fold. But I also fundamentally believe that the leaders of organizations need to be setting an expectation and a message, and have the courage to step out of the norm that they exist in, we exist in, and examine our practices through, again, this ready lens. It takes intentionality, it takes courage, and it takes patience.
Yeah.
I so agree with Wilma. There's an element of really being able to think about going slow to go fast, and this is it's the long game. I'd say for me, John, it's really important to see there's so much opportunity to upside in this work. I think often it's seen as something we have to do, and people lean into the moral imperative. But I see this as really about innovation and how do we really serve in a much broader way. So I think there's unlimited opportunities, and if you think about it from that lens, I think you would see different, see things that maybe you wouldn't if you thought about it just from a moral imperative standpoint.
Yep. It's the balance of the two that makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to thank you so much for the time today. Always a pleasure to spend a bit of quality time with you all. I imagine we'll spend a bit more time over the coming months. So excited for today's conversation's ability to really start today at this intersection of climate action and racial equity, realizing that these aren't trade-offs, but rather changing the way that we go about pursuing climate action creates incredible opportunity for how we also think about transforming communities. So with that, I will turn it back over to the SVI team.